Be me, just a regular guy working a decent office job in a department that actually functions. For years, it was a smooth operation. Our team was the engine of our section of the company. If something needed to be done right and on time, it came to us. It wasn't a boys' club, but the core of the team, the senior guys who handled the heavy lifting, were all men. Not by design, it just happened that way. People were hired for being good at their job. Nothing else mattered. The atmosphere was professional. We didn't talk about our personal lives much, but there was a deep current of mutual respect. You knew the guy next to you was competent, and he knew the same about you. We had Dave, the oldest guy on the team. He was a walking institution. Been with the company since the dark ages, knew every system, every client, every shortcut. Dave was the calm center of any storm. When everything was on fire, he'd just sip his coffee and solve the problem, line by line. All he ever talked about was his grandkids and the big cross-country RV trip he was planning with them for the summer. Then there was Kevin, a younger dude, maybe in his late 20s, smart, hardworking, and about to get married. He was saving every penny for a proper honeymoon, some island paradise he and his fiancée had been dreaming about. The rest of us were just the backbone, guys who came in, did a solid 8 hours of complex work, and went home. Our boss was fine, a typical middle manager. He knew enough not to mess with our workflow because we produced results, and our results made him look good. His main skill was staying out of the way and approving paperwork. Everything was stable, predictable, efficient. Then the email landed in everyone's inbox. Corporate was restructuring some administrative roles. Our old HR rep, a perfectly reasonable lady who just handled payroll and benefits, was retiring. Her replacement was a new hire from outside the company. Her name was Heather. The first time I saw her, I felt a weird chill. She had that specific forced bright smile that doesn't reach the eyes. She walked through the office like she was a colonial governor inspecting a troublesome outpost. Her eyes scanned everything, not with curiosity, but with judgment. The first week was quiet. She was observing. The second week, the small changes started. An all-staff memo announced a new mandatory policy. All employees must include their preferred pronouns in their email signatures. A few people grumbled, but whatever. It's a dumb, easy thing to do. We did it. But it was a sign of things to come. Next, the posters went up in the break room, pastel-colored infographics with corporate-approved slogans about diversity and inclusion. One of them had a cartoon drawing of a woman in a superhero cape standing on a mountain of defeated-looking men in suits. The text said, "The future is inclusive." We all knew what it meant. Dave saw it and just shook his head, pouring his coffee without a word. Then came the mandatory sensitivity and awareness workshops. Once a month, for 2 hours, the entire department had to sit in the big conference room while Heather gave a presentation. It wasn't about being professional or respectful. We already were. It was about deconstructing our problematic workplace culture. She talked a lot about unconscious bias and systemic issues. Her presentations were full of vague accusations. She'd put up a slide about toxic masculinity, and then just stare at the men in the room, letting the silence hang. She never named names, but her implications were crystal clear. According to her, our efficiency was a product of an aggressive, male-coded work environment. Our camaraderie was a non-inclusive social structure. Our quiet professionalism was emotional suppression. We just sat there, taking it. What else could we do? Argue with HR? That's a career death sentence. We'd just sit in the back, sharing tired glances while she talked. The boss would sit at the front, nodding enthusiastically at everything she said. The atmosphere in the office began to change. It became tense. People were afraid to joke around. The easy rapport we had was dissolving, replaced by a kind of wary silence. You could feel people measuring their words, afraid of saying something that could be misinterpreted. A few months of this went by. The productivity of the department, for the first time in years, started to dip slightly. People were less willing to collaborate, to go the extra mile. They just wanted to get their individual tasks done and get out. The place was becoming miserable. But we soldiered on. We had bills to pay. Then came the time of year when everyone puts in their summer vacation requests. This was a sacred ritual. Our work was cyclical, with a relatively quiet period over the summer. For years, the system was simple. You put in your request well in advance, the boss checks the calendar to make sure there's enough coverage and approves it. It always worked. No drama, no issues. Dave put in his request first. A full 3 weeks for that RV trip he'd been planning for what felt like a decade. He had the seniority and the vacation days to cover it twice over. Kevin put in his 2 weeks for his honeymoon. He'd already put the deposits down. Everything was booked. I put in for my week, just a simple plan to go camping and disconnect from everything. The other guys on the team did the same, staggering their requests as usual so the office wouldn't be a ghost town. The requests went into the system, forwarded to our boss for the first level approval, and then to HR for the final sign-off. Normally, we'd get the confirmation back in a day or two. A week went by. Silence. Kevin started getting nervous. He asked the boss if there was a problem. The boss got all shifty, wouldn't make eye contact. He just muttered something about how HR was reviewing the vacation policy and that we should all be patient. Another week crawled by. Still nothing. The tension was getting thick. Dave wasn't his usual calm self. You could see the worry etched on his face. And then the email came. It wasn't an individual response. It was a mass email sent from Heather, addressed to every single man on our team. The subject line was, "Update on summer leave allocations." My stomach dropped before I even opened it. The email was a masterpiece of corporate doublespeak. It started with a bunch of fluff about the company's commitment to equity and creating a balanced workplace. Then it got to the point. It stated that after a comprehensive review, HR had identified a historical imbalance in the approval of summer vacation time. It said that, statistically, male employees had disproportionately taken their leave during the peak desirable months of July and August. This, the email explained, had placed an unfair burden on our female colleagues and perpetuated a cycle of privilege. I had to read that line 3 times to believe it. We were privileged because we took vacation time that we had earned. The final paragraph was the kill shot. In order to rectify this systemic issue and foster a more equitable environment, the company will be prioritizing summer leave requests from our female staff this year. As a result, all vacation requests submitted by male employees for the period between July 1st and August 31st have been denied. It then said, we were welcome to reapply for vacation time in the off-peak season, starting in late September. The email ended with a cheerful, "Thank you for your understanding and your commitment to building a better, more inclusive workplace." For a solid minute, there was dead silence in the office, just the quiet hum of computers. Then I heard a low, strangled noise. I looked over at Kevin's desk. He was just staring at his screen, his face completely white. He was supposed to get married in 3 weeks. His honeymoon was booked and paid for. Then Dave slowly stood up. He was holding a printed copy of the email. His hands were shaking, not with weakness, but with pure, unadulterated rage. The spell was broken. The office erupted. It wasn't loud shouting, but a wave of angry, disbelieving murmurs. Guys were getting up, walking to each other's desks, showing each other the email as if to confirm they weren't all having the same nightmare. We decided to go to the boss, all of us. We filed into his glass-walled office. He looked up and saw our faces and immediately shrunk in his chair. Dave acted as the spokesman. He didn't raise his voice. He was eerily calm. He put the email down on the desk and asked the boss to explain. The boss couldn't even look at us. He just stammered and fidgeted with a pen. He said it was a new corporate policy, that it came from HR, that his hands were tied. We pressed him. We told him it was insane, that it was discriminatory. Kevin explained, his voice cracking, that his non-refundable honeymoon was on the line. Dave talked about the promise he made to his grandkids. The boss just kept repeating the same lines. "It's out of my hands. I can't override HR. We have to follow the new guidelines." He was a coward, a complete spineless jellyfish. He wasn't a manager. He was a human shield for corporate. He betrayed us. He saw this injustice coming and did nothing to stop it because he was afraid of a fight. We realized talking to him was a waste of time. There was only one person responsible for this. A few of us decided we had to talk to Heather directly, me, Dave, and Kevin, a delegation of the damned. We walked over to the HR department on the other side of the building. We didn't have an appointment. We didn't care. Her assistant tried to stop us, but we walked right past her. Heather was sitting at her desk, typing on her laptop. She looked up as we entered, and that same smug, self-satisfied smile spread across her face. She knew we were coming. She had been waiting for it. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "How can I help you?" Dave, ever the professional, started to lay out our case calmly and logically. He talked about the established procedures, about seniority, about the operational impact this would have. Heather let him finish, her smile never wavering. Then she leaned back in her chair, steepled her fingers, and gave us a little lecture. She said she understood that it can be uncomfortable when privileges you've long enjoyed are finally being questioned. She used the word privilege about 5 times in the first minute. Kevin, unable to hold back anymore, stepped forward. He told her about his wedding, his honeymoon. He practically begged her. He asked if an exception could be made, just this once. Heather's expression hardened slightly. She told Kevin that personal plans, while important, could not be allowed to stand in the way of systemic progress. Then she said something I will never forget. She looked him right in the eye and said that perhaps this was an opportunity for him and his fiancée to re-examine their attachment to traditional, patriarchal institutions like marriage. Kevin looked like he'd been slapped. He just shut down completely, took a step back, and didn't say another word. My own anger, which had been simmering, started to boil. I tried a different angle. I talked about the workflow. I explained that the entire senior team being denied vacation for the 2 quietest months of the year meant we'd all have to take it during the busiest fall season, which would cripple our projects. I was trying to appeal to logic, to business sense. Heather just waved a dismissive hand. She said the company was confident that our female colleagues were more than capable of stepping up and handling the workload. She said it would be a valuable growth opportunity for them. She was framing this as if she was doing them a favor, while simultaneously implying that we were the only thing holding them back. The final nail in the coffin was when Dave made his last appeal. He spoke about his decades of loyalty to the company. He talked about how he had given his entire career to this place, trained dozens of employees, worked countless hours of unpaid overtime to get projects over the line. He asked if that loyalty meant anything. Heather's smile returned, wider and more poisonous than ever. She told him that loyalty is a complex concept and that sometimes long-term employees can become resistant to necessary change. She said his perspective was understandable, but came from a place of entitlement. She was calling this man, this legend of the company, entitled. For wanting to take a vacation, he had earned 10 times over to see his family. That was it. We were done. There was no reasoning with this person. She wasn't an HR manager. She was a zealot, an ideologue with a little bit of power, and she was going to use it to punish people for sins she had invented in her own head. We didn't say another word. We just turned around and walked out of her office. The walk back to our department was the longest walk of my life. We were defeated, humiliated, powerless. We had followed the rules, worked hard, been loyal, and in return, the system had been turned against us for reasons that had nothing to do with our performance or our character. We were being punished simply for being men. When we got back, everyone was looking at us, waiting for news. Just seeing our faces was enough. The last glimmer of hope in the room died. The rest of the day was a blur. Nobody got any work done. The office was a tomb. The sound of typing was replaced by a heavy, suffocating silence. That evening, we all went to a local bar after work. Not just our team, but guys from other departments who had been hit with the same email. The mood was bleak. People were talking about quitting, about finding new jobs. But we all knew it wasn't that simple. Most of us had families, mortgages. You can't just walk away. We felt trapped, backed into a corner by a system that seemed rigged against us. We complained for an hour. We vented our fury. But it didn't change anything. We were still powerless. Then, sitting in the corner of the booth, nursing a single beer, I was watching Dave. He looked 100 years old, completely broken. He was talking about how he was going to tell his grandkids that the trip was off. Seeing him like that, something inside me just snapped. The despair turned into a cold, hard resolve. I leaned forward into the middle of the table. Everyone went quiet. I told them that fighting them on their terms was a losing game. HR holds all the cards. Logic doesn't work. Appeals to decency don't work. They had weaponized the rules against us. So, I said, we should do the same. I laid out a simple idea. They see us as just a faceless group, a demographic. They don't see us as individuals. They think they can just remove us from the equation without any consequences. We should show them what the consequences look like when the entire male workforce of a key department simply vanishes. I told them we shouldn't quit. We shouldn't even protest. We should follow the company's own policies to the absolute letter. The employee handbook was very clear about sick leave. It said that if an employee is feeling unwell, especially due to work-related stress or burnout, they are entitled and encouraged to take time off to recover. All it required was a note from a doctor or a licensed therapist. In the age of telehealth, getting a note for acute professional burnout was incredibly easy. My proposal was this. On the first day that the majority of our vacations were supposed to start, every single one of us would call in sick. Not with a cold, not with the flu. We would all use the exact same language. We were suffering from a hostile work environment that had led to severe stress and burnout. We would be taking sick leave, effective immediately, on the advice of a medical professional. We would use their own HR buzzwords against them. We would turn their weapon back on them. There was a moment of silence as everyone let the idea sink in. Then, a slow smile spread across Kevin's face. Then, another guy started to nod. A spark of hope, of defiance entered the room. For the first time all day, the despair started to lift. We weren't powerless anymore. We had a plan that was perfectly legal, perfectly within company policy, and utterly devastating. We were going to show them what privilege really looked like. It looked like an empty office and a department in flames. The plan was set. It was simple, elegant, and had a beautiful symmetry to it. We spent the next couple of weeks in a state of quiet, tense preparation. A group of us found a telehealth service that specialized in mental health and workplace stress. One by one, we each had a short video call with a therapist. We didn't have to lie. We just told them the truth. We described the mandatory workshops, the constant low-level accusations, the feeling of walking on eggshells. We explained the vacation situation, how personal and important plans were dismissed out of hand for purely ideological reasons. We described the feeling of being completely powerless and targeted by our own HR department. Every single one of us was diagnosed with the same thing: acute anxiety and professional burnout, directly attributable to a hostile work environment. The therapists were more than happy to write letters recommending immediate time off to recover. We had our ammunition, all perfectly documented and legitimate. The atmosphere in the office during those weeks was surreal. Outwardly, nothing had changed. We all came in and did our jobs. But underneath, there was a secret humming, a shared understanding that bound us all together. We communicated with nods and subtle glances. A look across the cubicle farm was enough to say, "Stay strong, the day is coming." Heather, meanwhile, was on a victory lap. She was obnoxiously cheerful, walking around the office with an air of profound self-satisfaction. She had won. She had taken on the patriarchy in our little department and put it in its place. She made a big show of personally approving the vacation requests for several of the women on the team, talking loudly about how happy she was to be empowering them. To their credit, most of the women looked deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. They knew what was happening was wrong. A few of them even quietly apologized to us, saying they had nothing to do with it. We told them we knew. Our issue wasn't with them, it was with the system and the person who had hijacked it. The boss continued his pathetic act of avoiding eye contact with any man in the department. He knew he had failed us, and his guilt was so obvious it was almost pitiable. Almost. The final week felt like the slow climb of a roller coaster. On Friday afternoon, we all left the office at 5 p.m. on the dot. We didn't say anything special to each other, just the usual, "have a good weekend." But we all knew. When we walked out that door, we wouldn't be back for a while. I spent that weekend feeling a strange mix of terror and exhilaration. What if someone broke? What if the plan failed? But deep down, I trusted the guys. We had been pushed too far. This was about more than a vacation now. It was about dignity. Monday morning came, the designated D-Day. I woke up early. I had my email pre-written. My therapist's note was attached. At exactly 8 a.m., I hit send. The subject line was, "Sick leave, my name." The body of the email was short and professional, stating that, on the advice of a medical professional, I was taking immediate leave to recover from work-related burnout caused by a hostile environment. I specified that I would be unreachable for the foreseeable future to focus on my recovery. As soon as I sent it, I turned my work phone off and put it in a drawer. It was an incredible feeling. A weight I didn't even realize I was carrying had been lifted. I knew that, at that exact moment, across the city, a dozen other men were doing the exact same thing, a digital, silent, coordinated act of defiance. The first couple of hours were quiet. Then, around 10:30 a.m., my personal phone started buzzing. It was the boss. I let it go to voicemail. He called again 2 minutes later. I ignored it. Then a text message came through. "I need you to call me ASAP, emergency." I ignored that too. A friend of mine, a woman from a different department who knew what was going on, was giving me updates. She said our section of the office was a morgue. All our desks were empty. The few junior women who had come in were just sitting there, looking stunned. The boss, she said, was pacing back and forth in his office, his face pale, frantically making phone calls. Heather had apparently marched into our department around 9:30 a.m., expecting to gloat over our defeated faces. When she saw the empty desks, her smug smile vanished. At first, she was just confused. Then, as the reality dawned on her, the confusion turned to rage. My friend said she heard Heather shouting at our boss in his office. She was accusing us of an illegal strike and a coordinated misogynistic attack. She was demanding that he order us all back to work immediately. The problem was, he couldn't. We weren't on strike. We were on documented, medically approved sick leave. There was nothing they could legally do. By noon, the chaos was escalating. Critical project deadlines were, that day. Clients were calling, and no one was there to answer their questions. The junior employees didn't have the experience or the security clearance to handle the work. The entire workflow of the department, the engine of the company, had seized. Heather's brilliant plan of having our empowered female colleagues pick up the slack had a tiny flaw. She hadn't considered that the work required years of specialized knowledge that we possessed. She had viewed us not as assets, but as obstacles. She thought we were interchangeable. She was learning, in the most brutal way possible, that she was wrong. Around 1 p.m., the big boss arrived, the regional director. This was a man none of us ever saw. He was a C-suite guy from corporate headquarters who only showed up if the building was on fire or if profits were taking a nosedive. Today, it was both. My friend texted me that the director walked straight into our department, took one look at the sea of empty chairs, and his face turned to stone. He didn't say a word. He just went into our boss's office and closed the door. Heather apparently tried to follow him in, but he held up a hand and shut the door in her face. She was left standing in the hallway, fuming. Her power was evaporating before her eyes. The meeting with our boss apparently lasted for about 20 minutes. When the door opened, our boss came out looking like he had just seen a ghost. The director followed, his expression grim. He told Heather to come with him to the main conference room. Now. The director was a man of action. He wasn't interested in ideologies. He was interested in results. And right now, the results were a catastrophe. An hour later, my personal phone rang again. This time, it was a number I didn't recognize. I decided to answer. It was the regional director. His voice was calm, deep, and held an unmistakable note of authority. He wasn't calling to threaten or accuse. He just said he wanted to understand what was going on. He said he had organized a conference call and was inviting me, Dave, Kevin, and a few of the other senior guys to join. He assured us it was just a conversation, not a disciplinary hearing. We quickly texted each other and agreed. We would all join the call. This was our moment. When we all dialed in, the director was the only other person on the line. Heather and our boss were not included. He got straight to the point. "I've seen the emails. I've heard one side of the story," he said. "Now I want to hear yours." Dave became our spokesman. In the calm, measured tone that we all respected, he laid out the facts. He didn't complain or whine. He simply presented a timeline of events. He talked about the functional, professional culture our department had for years. He described the changes that came with the new HR manager, the mandatory sessions, the accusatory tone, the general decline in morale. Then he got to the vacation policy. He explained how the long-standing fair system was thrown out. He told the director about Kevin's honeymoon, his own family trip, and how these personal significant life events were dismissed with insulting ideological jargon. He recounted the meeting in Heather's office, where she had called him entitled and told Kevin to rethink the patriarchal institution of marriage. Finally, he explained our decision. He said that we had all begun to suffer from genuine stress and burnout, that the company's own HR department had created a work environment that felt hostile and discriminatory. So, following company policy and the advice of medical professionals, we had taken the necessary leave to protect our health. He finished by saying that we were all loyal, long-term employees who had never had a single issue before this. When Dave was done, there was a long silence on the line. The director let it all sink in. Finally, he spoke. "Thank you for being candid," he said. "What you've described is a complete failure of management, a complete and utter failure." He told us he had been unaware of the policy change and the workshops. He said that the company hires people to do a job, and as long as they do it well, nothing else should matter. He said that what had happened was not only unprofessional, but unacceptable. He then made a series of promises. He said the vacation policy would be immediately reverted to the old system. All our denied vacation requests were approved, effective immediately. Furthermore, as an apology from the company for the stress and disrespect we had been shown, every man on our team would be given an additional week of paid vacation. We were stunned into silence. He then said, "I need my best team back online. I trust I'll see you all back in the office after your well-deserved time off." We all agreed. He thanked us for our time and ended the call. We had won. It was a total, unconditional victory. The next day, an email went out to the entire company from the regional director. It was vague, but the message was clear. It announced an immediate restructuring of the HR department to better align with our core business objectives. It also announced that our department manager was stepping down from his leadership role to pursue other opportunities within the company. We all knew what that meant. My friend, the one giving me updates, described the scene. Heather was called into a meeting with the director and a corporate lawyer. 10 minutes later, she came out, stone-faced, followed by security. They escorted her to her desk, watched her pack her personal belongings into a small cardboard box, and then walked her out of the building for good. Her reign was over. The public humiliation was absolute. Our old boss was demoted to a junior role in a department where he couldn't do any damage. His career was effectively over. When we eventually returned to work after our vacations, the atmosphere was completely different. The posters were gone, the workshops were canceled, the tension was gone. It was like a fever had broken. A new, no-nonsense HR manager was brought in, and the first thing she did was hold a meeting where she said her only job was to process payroll and make sure no one broke the law. Things went back to normal, better than normal actually, because we had learned something important. We had learned that we weren't powerless. We learned that when a small group of guys sticks together, stands up for each other, and acts with intelligence and solidarity, they can push back against a system that tries to crush them. A few weeks later, I got a message on my phone. It was a picture from Dave. He was standing in front of a massive redwood tree, his RV in the background, with his 2 grandkids on his shoulders. All 3 of them had huge, happy smiles. The caption just said, "Couldn't have done it without you guys, thank you." And I sat there looking at that picture and smiled. We didn't start the fight, but we sure as hell finished it.